Mother Teresa was a small woman who became a giant figure in the world. Her original name was Angize Gongshe Boyashu, and she was born in 1910 in Skopje, which is now the capital of North Macedonia. From a young age, she felt a strong calling to serve God by helping people in need. This deep feeling led her to leave her home and travel to India to become a nun. She chose the name Teresa in honor of Sainte Thérèse of Lisieux, a saint known for her simple and humble way of life. For many years she worked as a teacher in a school in Kolkata, but her heart was always troubled by the great poverty she saw just outside the school walls. The turning point in her life came during a train ride in 1946. She described this experience as a call within a call. She said she heard a clear message from God telling her to leave the convent and live among the poorest people, to serve them directly. It was a very difficult and scary decision, but she felt she had to obey. She started with almost nothing, wearing a simple white sari with a blue border, which would later become the uniform for her new religious order. Her first mission was to walk into the slums of Kolkata and find the people who were forgotten by everyone else, the sick, the dying, and the lonely. In 1950, she received permission from the Vatican to start her own group, which she called the Missionaries of Charity. The mission of this new order was very clear: to care for the hungry, the naked, the homeless, the crippled, the blind, the lepers, all those people who feel unwanted, unloved, uncared for throughout society. She opened her first home for the dying, where people who had no one could come and pass away with dignity and love. This small beginning grew very quickly, as many young women from India and around the world were inspired by her example and wanted to join her work. Her work was not just about providing food or medicine, it was about providing human connection. Mother Teresa believed that the greatest poverty was the feeling of being unloved and unwanted. She would often hold the hands of the dying, clean their wounds, and simply sit with them, offering them comfort and the knowledge that someone cared. This simple act of love and compassion touched the hearts of people everywhere. Her message was powerful because it was easy to understand. Every person, no matter how poor or sick, has value and deserves to be treated with respect and kindness. This is the image of Mother Teresa that the world came to know and love. Mother Teresa's reputation grew far beyond the streets of Kolkata. Soon, newspapers and television stations from all over the world started telling her story. People were amazed by this small nun who was dedicating her entire life to helping the poorest of the poor. Her work seemed to be a pure example of selfless love in a world that often felt selfish and divided. She became a symbol of hope and compassion, a person who showed that one individual could make a real difference. Leaders of countries, famous actors, and ordinary people all looked up to her as a moral guide and an inspiration for how to live a better life. This global admiration led to many prestigious awards. In 1979, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, one of the highest honors in the world. When she accepted the award, she famously asked that the money for the celebratory dinner be given to the poor of Kolkata instead. This act only made her more famous and loved. She used her growing fame not for herself, but to bring attention to the needs of the poor and to raise money for her missions. She traveled the world, speaking to large crowds and meeting with powerful leaders, always with the same simple message of loving and caring for those in need. Her canonization as a saint by the Catholic Church in 2016 was the final step in solidifying her public image. For the Church, a saint is someone who has lived a life of heroic virtue and is believed to be in heaven with God. The process required 2 miracles to be attributed to her after her death. The Church investigated cases where people who prayed to her were said to be miraculously healed from serious illnesses. For millions of Catholics and other admirers, her sainthood was not a surprise. It was a confirmation of what they already believed. She was Saint Teresa of Calcutta, a modern-day saint who had walked among them. The image of Mother Teresa as a living saint was very powerful. She appeared to be completely dedicated, humble and tireless in her work. She was seen visiting war zones, comforting victims of natural disasters, and opening homes for people with AIDS at a time when they were feared and rejected by many. Her organization, the Missionaries of Charity, expanded to operate in over 130 countries, running homes for the dying, orphanages and soup kitchens. To the outside world, she was the ultimate example of goodness, a person who truly lived the teachings of Jesus Christ by serving the least of his brothers and sisters. Despite the widespread praise, not everyone saw Mother Teresa as a perfect saint. Over time, some journalists, doctors, and even former volunteers began to ask difficult questions about her work and her methods. These were not just small criticisms. They were serious concerns that challenged the popular image of her as a selfless helper of the poor. One of the first major public critiques came from a British journalist named Christopher Hitchens. In 1994, he made a documentary called Hell's Angel, and later wrote a book called The Missionary Position, which were very critical of her. Hitchens and others argued that while Mother Teresa was very good at comforting the dying, she was not very good at helping the sick get better. They pointed out that the conditions in her homes were often very poor. Volunteers reported that media group used medical needles on a tray, nurse reusing syringes, unsanitary medical supplies at stock at distribute_equally. Needles were reused without being properly sterilized, that patients were not given strong enough pain medication, and that basic medical diagnoses were often not made. Doctors who visited her homes were shocked by the lack of proper medical care, saying that many conditions that could have been treated were left to get worse. This raised the question, was she really helping people, or was she just making their suffering more bearable while they died? There were also questions about the large amounts of money that her organization received. The Missionaries of Charity received millions of dollars in donations from people all over the world. However, critics claimed that very little of this money was actually spent on improving the medical facilities or the living conditions in her homes. They asked where all the money was going. Some reports suggested that media group, Vatican exterior with money icons, money being transferred to religious institution, envelopes sent to Vatican at stock at distribute_equally. The funds were sent to the Vatican or used to open more convents rather than to build modern hospitals or provide better care for the people she claimed to serve. This led to accusations that she was more interested in promoting her religious beliefs than in providing genuine help. These criticisms were very shocking to many people who admired her. It was hard to believe that the woman who was seen as a global symbol of charity could be the subject of such serious accusations. Her supporters often dismissed these critics as people who were against religion or who did not understand her spiritual mission. They argued that her goal was not to be a hospital administrator, but to provide love and spiritual comfort. However, the questions did not go away. They started a long and difficult conversation about the reality of Mother Teresa's work, a conversation that continues to this day. The most powerful and troubling criticisms of Mother Teresa and her organization have come from people who knew it from the inside, the former sisters of the Missionaries of Charity. Over the years, many women who dedicated their lives to the order have decided to leave and share their stories. Their accounts paint a very different picture from the public image of a loving and compassionate sisterhood. They describe a culture of extreme control, psychological abuse, and unhealthy rules that caused great pain and suffering. These women say they were drawn to the order by a desire to serve the poor, but what they found inside was a rigid and often cruel system. One of the most common complaints is about the extreme level of control that superiors had over the sisters' lives. Former members report that they were isolated from their families, sometimes only being allowed to visit them for 1 month every 10 years. Their letters were read by their superiors, and their phone calls had to be made in the presence of another sister. They were not allowed to form close friendships with each other because this was seen as a particular attachment that took away from their love for God. Every small action, from what they ate to when they could rest, was controlled by a superior, leaving them with little personal freedom or ability to think for themselves. Many former sisters have also spoken about a culture of psychological and verbal abuse. They describe being regularly insulted, humiliated, and belittled by their superiors. This was often justified as a way of teaching them humility and obedience, a part of their religious formation. However, the effect was often to break their spirit and create an environment of fear. Some have also made even more serious allegations, including that complaints of sexual abuse or inappropriate physical contact by other sisters or priests were ignored or covered up. In one case, a sister who was assaulted by a priest claimed that Mother Teresa told her to forget about it and protect the reputation of the church. These former members say their goal in speaking out is not to destroy the organization but to bring about reform. They have tried for years to bring their concerns to the attention of the Vatican, often with little success. They describe a system that is very resistant to change and that protects its leaders from accountability. The experiences of these women raise serious questions about the internal culture of the missionaries of charity. Their stories suggest that behind the public image of service and love there was a hidden world of control, fear and suffering for the very women who were supposed to be carrying out the mission. A central part of the controversy surrounding Mother Teresa involves her beliefs about suffering. For her, suffering was not just a negative thing to be eliminated, it was a way to become closer to Jesus Christ. She often told the sick and dying that their pain was, in her words, Jesus kissing them. She believed that by accepting their suffering, they were sharing in the passion of Christ on the cross, which was, a beautiful and valuable spiritual gift. In her eyes, this belief deeply influenced how the missionaries of charity operated. The focus was often more on spiritual comfort and preparing souls for heaven than on providing modern medical treatment to cure their illnesses. This philosophy led to, many of the problems that critics pointed out in her homes. Volunteers and doctors were often horrified by what they saw. They described a lack of basic hygiene, with sick people lying on simple mats close together, increasing the risk of infection. They reported that pain medication was often withheld, even for patients with terminal cancer, because Mother Teresa believed that suffering brought them closer to God. Basic medical equipment was scarce, and conditions that could have been easily managed or cured in a proper hospital were often left untreated. The homes were described as places for people to die, not places for them to get well. For example, former volunteers have shared stories of sisters reusing hypodermic needles after simply rinsing them in cold water. They have spoken of patients with treatable diseases who were not taken to a real hospital until it was too late. One doctor who visited the home in Kolkata called it haphazard and disorganized and said the care was not much better than a medieval poorhouse. The question for many was why this was happening when the organization had access to millions of dollars in donations. With that money, they could have built modern, clean facilities with trained medical staff and proper equipment. The defenders of Mother Teresa argue that these critics misunderstand the purpose of her work. They say she never intended to run hospitals. Her mission was to provide a place of love and dignity for those who had been abandoned by society, people who would otherwise die alone on the street. The care they provided was meant to be compassionate, not clinical. From this perspective, the spiritual comfort and love offered to a dying person were more important than modern medicine. However, for critics, this explanation is not enough. They argue that it is not compassionate to deny someone available medical care and pain relief in the name of a religious belief about the beauty of suffering. When faced with these serious criticisms, Mother Teresa and her supporters generally responded in a few consistent ways. They often dismissed the critics as being uninformed or having bad intentions. The argument was that people who were not religious, especially those who were against the Catholic Church's teachings, could not possibly understand the spiritual nature of their work. They suggested that critics like Christopher Hitchens were simply trying to attack a beloved religious figure to get attention. This approach often successfully painted the critics as outsiders who were unfairly targeting a woman who was doing so much good in the world. Another common response was to emphasize the love and compassion at the heart of their mission. Mother Teresa herself often said, "We are not social workers, we are contemplatives in the heart of the world." This meant that their primary goal was spiritual, not medical. They were there to offer love, dignity, and a connection to God for people who had nothing. By framing their work this way, they could sidestep the specific criticisms about poor medical care. If the goal is not to run a hospital, then you cannot be judged by the standards of a hospital. This argument was very powerful for her many followers, who believed that spiritual care was the most important thing. The organization also pointed to the sheer scale of their work as a defense. They would highlight the thousands of sisters serving in hundreds of homes all over the world, helping millions of the poorest and most desperate people. The message was that they were doing something while their critics were just talking. They would ask, "What are you doing to help the poor?" This was an effective way to put the critics on the defensive and to make their concerns seem small compared to the vast amount of good work being done. For the average person, it was easier to believe in the visible good of the many homes and missions than in the complicated and disturbing stories of critics. However, the organization has rarely engaged directly with the specific, detailed allegations, especially those from former sisters. When former members have shared their stories of abuse and control, the official response from the missionaries of charity has often been a flat denial. A spokesperson for the order has called the claims patently false and described them as old grievances from a small group of unhappy people. This refusal to acknowledge or investigate the claims from within has made it difficult for any real dialogue or reform to happen. It creates a situation where there are two completely different stories and the public is left to decide which one to believe. Today, many years after Mother Teresa's death, the Missionaries of Charity continue to be a large and active organization. There are around 5,000 sisters working in nearly 140 countries around the world. They continue to run the same kinds of facilities that their founders started: homes for the dying, orphanages, soup kitchens, and shelters for the homeless. The sisters, in their iconic white and blue saris, are still a common sight in many of the world's poorest areas. They remain dedicated to their mission of serving the poorest of the poor and continue to attract new members who are inspired by the legacy of St. Teresa of Calcutta. However, the question of whether things have changed within the organization is a difficult one to answer. From the outside, the work looks much the same as it did when Mother Teresa was alive. The sisters continue to live a very simple life of prayer and service, and the focus remains on providing direct personal care to those in need. The public image of the organization is still largely positive, especially among Catholics and others who admire the sisters' dedication and self-sacrifice. For these supporters, the Missionaries of Charity are still a powerful force for good in the world. Yet, the voices of criticism have not gone silent. In fact, in recent years, more former sisters have come forward to share their experiences of abuse, control, and neglect. They claim that the same problems that existed under Mother Teresa continue to this day. They describe a system that has not reformed itself and that still prioritizes obedience and institutional reputation over the well-being of its own members. These former sisters have organized and tried to bring their concerns to the highest levels of the Catholic Church, including writing letters directly to Pope Francis. They say their efforts have been mostly ignored. This suggests that while the work of the Missionaries of Charity continues, the deep-seated cultural problems may not have been addressed. The official leadership continues to deny the allegations, which makes internal reform very difficult. It seems that the organization is caught between its powerful public image and the painful private testimonies of those who have left. Without a willingness to listen to criticism and investigate the claims of abuse, it is hard to see how real change can happen. The organization continues its mission, but it does so under the shadow of these serious and unresolved questions. Mother Teresa's legacy is now much more complicated than it once was. For decades, she was seen almost universally as a symbol of pure goodness. She was the woman who gave up everything to serve the most rejected members of society. This powerful image is still very much alive for millions of people. They see her as a saint who lived a life of heroic love and sacrifice. They focus on the comfort she brought to countless dying individuals and the global movement of charity she inspired. For them, her legacy is one of compassion, faith, and a radical commitment to the poor that serves as an inspiration for all of humanity. However, there is another darker side to her legacy that can no longer be ignored. This is the legacy described by her critics and by the former members of her own order. This legacy includes the poor quality of medical care in her homes, her cult of suffering, and the questionable management of vast financial donations. It is a legacy that includes a rigid and controlling internal culture that allegedly caused immense psychological and emotional harm to the women who had joined to serve God. This perspective suggests that her primary mission was not to alleviate poverty or sickness, but to promote a particular brand of conservative Catholicism, no matter the human cost. These two conflicting views make it very difficult to form a simple conclusion about her life and work. It seems that both have elements of truth. She was undoubtedly a person of immense personal conviction and courage, who chose a life of extreme hardship in order to serve others. The comfort and love she personally gave to many forgotten people was real. At the same time, the evidence from so many different sources, journalists, doctors, volunteers, and former sisters, makes it impossible to dismiss the criticisms as mere lies. The problems with medical neglect and the abusive internal culture appear to be real as well. Therefore, her legacy is one of deep and troubling contradictions. She was a global celebrity who lived a life of personal poverty. She was praised for her compassion, yet her organization is accused of cruelty. She raised millions of dollars to help the poor, yet her facilities remained shockingly basic. She is celebrated as a saint who brought people closer to God, yet she is accused of glorifying pain and causing unnecessary suffering. Understanding Mother Teresa means being willing to look at all of these contradictions without trying to simplify her into just a saint or just a sadist. Her story is a complex mix of light and shadow. The life of Mother Teresa forces us to ask a very important question. What does it really mean to be a saint? For many people, a saint is a perfect person, someone without flaws who always does the right thing. We often imagine saints as heroes of faith who are completely pure and good. When we look at them this way, any criticism or evidence of mistakes can be very shocking. It can feel like an attack on our beliefs. If Mother Teresa had serious flaws, does that mean she cannot be a saint? Does it mean her entire life's work was a lie? Perhaps we need to think about sainthood in a different way. In the Catholic tradition, saints are not believed to be perfect people. They are human beings who struggled with their own weaknesses and doubts, but who tried to live a life of extraordinary faith and love for God. The Church recognizes them as saints because they are seen as exceptional role models of Christian virtue, not because they never made a mistake. From this perspective, it is possible for someone to be a saint and also be a flawed and complicated human being. Their imperfections do not necessarily cancel out the good that they did. The controversy around Mother Teresa encourages us to think more critically about the people we admire. It is easy to create simple heroes and villains, but real life is rarely that black and white. People are complex. They can do great good in one area while causing harm in another, sometimes at the same time. The story of Mother Teresa shows that even someone who is celebrated around the world for their goodness can have a story that is filled with difficult questions and contradictions. It teaches us that we should be willing to listen to all sides of a story, especially the voices of those who have been hurt or silenced. Ultimately, the question of whether Mother Teresa was a saint is a matter of personal belief. For some, the evidence of her good works and her powerful faith will be enough. For others, the evidence of suffering, neglect, and abuse will make it impossible to see her as a holy figure. Maybe the most important lesson from her story is not about her, but about us. It challenges us to look beyond simple labels and to think about what true compassion and charity look like. Does it mean comforting the dying? Or does it mean doing everything possible to help them live? This is a question with no easy answer.